him because he dressed well, was handsome, and had a strong presence, but he ignored them. Edward enrolled and then noticed some guys talking about a beautiful girl who was coming to enroll at their school. He didn't pay attention and continued walking. As Edward was leaving the school, a girl passed by him. She was the girl the guys had been talking about, the beautiful one coming to enroll. Elsa glanced at Edward, but didn't recognize him. Edward continued walking without noticing anything. On his way home, Edward saw that there were people at Elsa's old house. He thought to himself, maybe someone bought Elsa's old house. He continued on his way home. That evening, Edward heard his parents talking about Elsa's family. Elsa's family has returned to the country, his mother told his father. Edward heard this and quickly went outside to check Elsa's old house to see if she was there. He saw different people at the house and left feeling sad. He went back home. Yes, Elsa's family had returned to the country. They still owned their old house, but were temporarily living in an apartment. While they had the house renovated, Elsa's aunt and uncle were looking after the house, so Edward didn't really see Elsa there. The school year started. A basketball rolled near Elsa. She kicked it back to the guys playing basketball, but accidentally, the ball hit Edward on the head instead. As she saw the ball hit the unknown guy, she suddenly remembered the boy who used to bully her when she threw a crumpled paper at him. Elsa smiled at the memory. In reality, Edward saw where the ball came from and who did it. "Oh, sorry," Elsa said, feeling a bit embarrassed. Edward looked at the girl responsible, his face showing annoyance, but he continued walking without saying anything. He also remembered the past when someone threw a crumpled paper at his head. Edward knew it was Elsa because he saw her reflection as they walked one behind the other. He had only pretended not to know because he wanted to let Elsa get back at him. Edward smiled as he walked. Elsa tried to follow the guy, but she remembered her class was about to start. After her class ended, she went out of the room to look for the guy and apologize. She saw him leaving the school gate and followed him. She continued following him until the place he was heading to became familiar. He reached a house, and Elsa realized it was her old house, close to the guy's house. She thought the guy might be Edward. Yes, it was Edward, she thought. Elsa went back to the apartment where she and her father were staying. She looked for the photo album to find the picture of her and Edward when they were kids, but she couldn't find it. Elsa felt sad, but thought it was okay, because Edward had never done anything nice for her until she left the country. The next day, it was time for school again. At the school entrance, Elsa accidentally bumped into Edward. She was surprised and apologized to Edward for what happened the day before. Edward replied, "So it was you. It's okay. It didn't hurt." Elsa was puzzled because Edward still didn't recognize her. Edward had changed a lot. He had become quiet and patient, and he had grown even more handsome. Elsa didn't know that Edward didn't recognize her because she had changed so much herself. She was extremely beautiful now, and almost all the boys at school were always looking at her. Elsa continued to walk alongside Edward, trying to talk to him about various things, but Edward still didn't recognize her. They eventually parted ways, as they had different classrooms. During break time, Elsa saw Edward eating alone at a table. She sat down at his table, but Edward ignored her. Elsa looked for a way to get his attention and pretended her pen had fallen near where Edward was eating. Edward picked it up and handed it back to her. "Thank you," said Elsa. She mentioned, "So, you live on Avenue Street." Edward was puzzled as to how Elsa knew where he lived. "I live nearby," Elsa said. Still, Edward didn't say much. Eventually, it was time to go back to class. After classes, Elsa sat in the school park for a while. She noticed Edward looking at her. When she stood up, she realized she had sat on chewing gum and glanced at Edward, wondering if he was behind it again. That evening, Edward's friend invited him over to study at his place. Meanwhile, Elsa and her father visited their old house. Elsa's father suggested they visit Edward's family since he was friends with Edward's parents. Elsa agreed and went along. While Elsa's father talked with Edward's father, Elsa chatted with Edward's mother. "You've become so beautiful, Elsa. You've changed so much," said Edward's mother. "Thank you," replied Elsa. She asked about her old playmate, Edward. "Where is Edward?" asked